Thank you so much. I have to get used to holding this microphone. I always want to talk with my hands, so this is going to be a little bit of a challenge for me today. Thank you for coming out here and to discuss the difficult on this early morning in this awesome location, and thank you for the whole team for organizing this. It's great. I've been asked to talk about taboos, and that was maybe obviously because of the business I'm in. And I founded 3.5 years ago, I set off my job together with my business partner and one of my best friends, Wendeline, and we set up Yoni. And Yoni is a business in tampons, pads, and panty liners. And we, one part of our mission is to break the taboo of menstruation. So I'm very familiar with the taboo of menstruation. I want to talk more about that today. But coming here, I took a step back and I started to think about what actually is a taboo, which taboos are out there that I may be less familiar with, and how can I look at what we're doing at Yoni and how can that maybe apply to other taboos that need breaking. So I hope to inspire you guys a little bit and bear with me in this early morning. Yeah, so what is a taboo? I went to the dictionary, and they say that taboo is something forbidden or sacred based on religious beliefs or morals. Basically, it's unacceptable behavior that generally causes an emotional reaction. We feel a strong disgust towards, so it's not just something immoral like stealing or gambling. And you can kind of see two types of taboos, those that are quite constant through time and space, and those that are ever-changing. And so there are a couple of taboos like incest or cannibalism, which has some sort of evolutionary advantage, and that you see in the animal kingdom often as well. And these are the taboos that I'm not really going to talk about today. And so, yeah. And then there are these other taboos that are ever-changing and change and really vary between cultures, religions, geography, time periods. Things like adultery, interracial marriage, let's see, yeah, food taboos, all these type of things that are ever changing. And and some of these are regulated by law, so there are laws against some of these taboos, and others are less regulated, or these laws have changed. So I think that's really something quite interesting to look at. And if you look at the categories of taboos, because I started in my office this week, I asked people what are taboos other than just menstruation, because that's what we're talking about all the time. And it actually was kind of difficult to come up with different taboos. So I went and researched a little bit, and I found that there were 4 main categories of taboo. And the first generally has to do with sex. There are a lot of taboos that have to do with sex, like adultery, masturbation, incest, pedophilia, and I could go on. And then there's some that are based, I feel, on differences between people, like bigotry, racism, and others about murder and death, murder being a taboo in itself, but also abortion, suicide, euthanasia. And then there are a lot of taboos around bodily functions. So like, I mean, maybe it's less of a serious taboo, but belching or nose blowing. I, as an American, I'm half American, half Dutch, but when I moved to Holland, I thought it was really strange how people blew their nose so loudly in public. I think it's more of a taboo in the US than here, but I was like, we used to call my aunt, we called her honk, because she would be blowing her nose all the time. And then another bodily function is obviously menstruation now, and menstruation is the taboo that I'm most familiar with, personally as well as professionally. And it's the taboo that I want to talk a little bit more about today. So menstruation is really a long-standing taboo, and if you look at the word taboo, it is derived from the Polynesian word tapu. My pronunciation might be off. But tapu means sacred, as well it was the word for menstruation in the Polynesian language. And so it's a long-standing taboo that you can see is maintained through all the main religions. So all the main religions found that menstruating women, for some, were seen as impure, unclean, and therefore unfit for ceremonial practices or other daily behaviors. Well, how did this come to being, was my question. And there's very little literature I could find that would help me explain. But one thing is very clear, that menstruation for a long time really wasn't fully understood, and I would argue that it's still not fully understood. And so it was up until, it wasn't until the 1800s that menstruation was actually seen in connection with ovulation, so that that cycle was actually fully understood. And even before then, the uterus was often seen as something autonomous from the female body with its own emotions. And usually these were negative emotions, and that's why it needed to bleed. Like, I mean, it's crazy. Plato even talks about this. And even up until like the 1920s, there was a study done where they saw, where like a well-known American doctor termed the coin menotoxin, which was a toxic substance that women were secreting through their skin while menstruating, and that's why all the flowers would wilt while they were holding them. I have no idea how this came to being. And even now, I would still like to argue that it's not fully understood, because how many of you guys know what PMS means, or know someone who PMSs? I'm PMSing. Yeah, well, some people seem familiar with the term, and PMS is really a mental disorder, supposedly, but in the Western world, it's thought that most women suffer, like 80 to 90% of the women, it said, suffer from PMS, which is supposed to be strong, extreme emotional fluctuation, onset by hormonal fluctuation right before you get your period. There's no scientific base for this, which is, I think, really, well, I think it's crazy, basically. Now, let's go back to history. So I was questioning, how did menstruation become a taboo in these religions? Well, it wasn't fully understood, and something that's not fully understood was then seen as something sacred, something powerful, as well as something evil and dangerous. And when something's dangerous, you need to make sure you're not going to be in danger. So it needed to be contained. And so rules came about to make sure that this threat, this potential danger, wouldn't come about. And that meant that women were excluded, as we already spoke about. Like, were excluded from religious participation, from daily activities. You had to eat separately. Isolation huts where menstruating women had to sleep. And it wasn't until like 2005 in Nepal, menstruation huts, these isolation huts, were banned. So this is something that still happens today. It's not something all the way in the past, but it's really something that's still, I feel, relevant today. And what I think what happened by seeing menstruation as something dangerous and something not normal, we've medicalized menstruation. And medicalization really means, let's be scientific about this. Menstruation really means that menstruation is no longer regarded as a normal part of life, but as something medical in nature, requiring a medical solution. And this is reflected, I feel, in our vocabulary that we use around menstruation. So we say feminine hygiene or sanitary pads. So menstruation is something dirty, something not unhygienic. And this in itself already has an impact on how we view menstruation. So, I mean, half of the world population, I think today, there are 500 million women who are menstruating on this planet, and still it's thought of something shameful, and even here in the Netherlands. And shame is really a strong emotion that stems from fear, really. And it's sad, I think. I think it's sad that women are made to feel shameful about something that is necessarily going to happen to you, and that is reflected that most women have, hopefully. And to maintain shame, I think an important part of this is the lack of public discussion on the topic. So if it's something isolated, if it's something not normal, if it's something that you have to be shamed about, you're not going to talk about it. And so there's really a lack of public discussion on this topic. And well, that's something that we hope to, well, kind of change. I often, when setting up Yoni and still now, I often get reactions from people who say, well, menstruation isn't really a taboo here anymore. And I would argue that that's not true. If you look in the world in general, I mean, there's already 1 in every 10 African girls stop going to school for at least so many days a week because they're menstruating, because of the taboo around it, and because of there's no way to actually deal with, to practically deal with menstruating. I think that in itself has severe social as well as economic consequences. But even here in the Netherlands, 19% of young girls don't receive any information about menstruation before their first period. And I would even go further to argue that a lack of knowledge and education keep women away from actually being able to be responsible for their own bodies, for their health, as well as for the emotions that they're experiencing. If you're told that the emotions you're experiencing are PMS, and so then there's no responsibility, you have no responsibility for actually looking at the real source of these emotions. And there's said that there's been scientific research done saying that if you look at the mood swings between men and women, they're actually pretty much the same. But if you say that women have these more extreme emotions than men, I think it contributes to the stereotype of women being unstable, less capable, and hence less competent than men, which contributes, I think, to the continuous wage gap and the glass ceilings that we sometimes talk about. So I would really argue that it's something present still here today. And that's why I think it's so interesting to look back in time at the origin of a taboo and where it comes from, actually, because it brings a better understanding. But who's winning? I mean, there has to be winners. There are losers, there are winners. Who are the winners? Well, business, because the potential market around menstruation and the medicalization of menstruation is half the population, so that's great. Also for my business. So there are drugs, PMS drugs. There are lots of therapies. There's books being sold on just about PMS. There are drugs to deal with the physical side effects like cramping or bloating. There are drugs to suppress menstruation. I think there are 100 million women worldwide on the pill, and it's a $2 billion industry in the US alone. And then feminine hygiene products like tampons and pads. That's a 15 billion euro worldwide business, so it's not small at all. And I would say business are the winners. Now, the last industry is interesting. It's the industry that I'm in, and I hope that we're doing things a little bit differently, and I'd love to show you a little bit of what we've been doing, and hopefully, and also to show what others are doing in the space, and to spawn the discussion on menstruation. So let's take a look. Well, first of all, this is me and my business partner, Wendy. We know each other from university, and we never ever thought that we'd get into the business of tampons, pads, and panty liners. That's not something that you dream of as a little girl. So we've known each other for over 16 years, and about 4 years ago, the idea for Yoni came, and that was brought about really by something very personal that happened to me. I became 30 here in the Netherlands. When you turn 30, you need to be checked for cervical cancer. I found out that I was in a developmental stage of cervical cancer, and in that way, I started, I had to go into this medical trajectory, and I was really looking for ways to better support my health. And in this search, I met a doctor who advised me to start using organic cotton tampons, pads, and panty liners. And not because they would have caused the cancer, but because further reduce any irritation in that part of my body. And for me, this was really the first time that I ever stopped to think about my use of tampons, pads, and panty liners, something that I've been using for, well, now over 15, 20 years. Crazy. And it was really something very personal, but I found that I couldn't find organic cotton tampons, pads at my normal supermarket or drugstore, so I had to bike to my special store to go buy my special tampons, which I think all the women here can feel like that doesn't really work out, practically speaking. And every time that I had to travel or was at Schiphol even, I couldn't get my special tampons. And so about 2 years later, I, on a Sunday, had to bike extra amounts to get my special tampons, and I ended up at Wenwing's kitchen table, and we started talking about this topic. And that's when we realized that on your normal boxes of tampons and pads, there's no ingredients listed. Whereas any other care products, let's say your shampoo, your toothpaste, any other care product, they list the ingredients. You can know what's in it. And you might not totally understand what's in it, but if you want to make an informed choice, you can. And for these products, nothing is listed on the boxes. And these are the most intimate products I personally use monthly. So that we thought was crazy, and we decided it needed to change. We didn't want to be held in the dark anymore, and we decided that if we, as two pretty conscious women, didn't know about this and hadn't heard about organic cotton tampons and pads and had never questioned our use of these products, that probably most women hadn't. And so on that Sunday at that table, we really we came up with what has become our mission and what we still do today, which is on the one hand, we share the story, and on the other hand, we make sure they become available. So I'm not going to be talking much about the availability. I'll just mention that we've been doing sales for now 2+ years. You can find Yoni at Ethos and Albert Heijn, which are mainstream supermarkets and drugstores. That's the first time in the Netherlands that there's an organic cotton product on the shelf, and that's really the first time in most of Europe that that's there. So that's really great. But how did we get there? That was a long road and a lot of hard work. But it started with, I think, taking a look at the industry in its whole. And I think the one opportunity that we saw, because this was a taboo subject, everything around tampons and pads, all the kind of advertising done, the way that the packaging looks, was really boring and pretty the same. Like, you might know the women in white leggings running around, and blue fluids. I don't know where the blue came from, but blue fluids being poured on something. And we felt, wow, we could do this differently. And then we looked at, I mean, we always are constantly looking at other industries for our inspiration, because looking at our industry doesn't inspire us at all. And so when looking at other care products, I mean, so much attention is put into a lot of the packaging so that it looks beautiful, you know, your cream or whatever. And how sexy is a facial cream? It's not. And I would say it's no less sexy than a packaging for tampons and pads. And so we've put a lot of attention into the design of what we do, because we believe that making something visually attractive already sparks a conversation, or at least creates a little bit more space to think about something differently, in a different light. It puts tampons and pads in a different light, and we're hoping that it's taking it out from that shameful, in Holland you would say verdomd boekje, but that shameful corner, out from the toilet paper and putting it back as a care product, which it is, because all women, well, I don't have to say that again. As I was saying, we try to use visual imagery to inspire people and to spark conversation. So this is just a little snippet from our Instagram, which I think is really cool. I think it's one of the coolest things we do. I didn't really know how to use Instagram when I started. A lot of things I didn't know. I still don't really know. But it's a place where we've been able to expand our visual identity and to also spark, I think, conversations on topics that kind of are related to menstruation. And as we've been talking about, the consequences of the taboo of menstruation has a lot, I think, has consequences being like female equality. Yeah, I'm a feminist, and so we try to spark conversation. So a lot of the things that we do with creatives, I'm hoping that this is going to work. This is a video that I hope will work in a minute, and this is one of the ways that we've tried to spark conversations on creating more awareness for the female reproductive system and cycle, because we realize that a lot of women actually don't understand how their own body works because it's not really generally talked about. And yeah, you could make something like textbook-like, but I would say that it's much more interesting and inspiring to do this in a more creative way. And so we teamed up with Ina and Sanna, who are two really great women here, quite close by in Amsterdam. They make music videos, they do commercials, they do loads of things, but luckily they also wanted to work with us. And they made these little films that you can also find on our Instagram that highlight the peak points in the female cycle, and so and that's ovulation and menstruation, obviously. And so let's see if this works. So exciting. They were so awesome. So for me, it's really inspiring to work with other creatives that help me and Wendeline further develop our visual identity. And so we've worked with various creatives who have, who've never done anything in this industry. Even our packaging was designed by Tonic. They're also a creative agency here in the neighborhood, and they had never created a packaging, and they'd never really done anything for a commercial product. But it even won a packaging design award immediately. And then I know that Nikki, one of the founders of Tonic, Nikki and Thomas, that's why it's called Tonic, was then asked to be in some sort of board for a packaging design award. She's like, I feel totally like not competent for this because I've only made one packaging. But I think that's, for me, it's really inspiring to work with people that are outside of the industry and that can give a fresh feel or a fresh way of looking at a particular subject like menstruation. And so I don't know if you guys are aware, but well, what is it now? 2 weeks ago or so, 2.5 weeks ago, it was International Women's Day. Anybody realize that it was International Women's Day? Well, I was really excited. I had to work really hard on International Women's Day. We had a campaign, and again, this campaign really doesn't have anything like the video that you just saw, and like a lot of things that we do. It's not necessarily pushing the product, but it's telling a story that I think is worth telling, something that at least makes me feel inspired. And so we gave a platform to about 7 inspiring women who are change makers in their own way, and interviewed them and asked them how they saw the role of female leadership today. what their thoughts were on feminism and how they felt being a woman impact their life and their work. And so that was something really fun to do. And yeah, and I think it was quite inspiring. And so what we want to do with these things is to spark a conversation and to hopefully get people to want to know more, to educate themselves, and in that way continue to talk about the subject, which will hopefully break the taboo. And so, not to just only show loads of things that Yoni's done, but I thought it was interesting to also show you guys what other people are doing on this particular taboo. And so I just want to go through a few. One is another business, Thinks. They make period-proof underwear. Yep. It's actually one of the very few innovations in this industry. So I think in the past 50 years, there's been almost no innovation in the tampon pad and panty liner business. And they've come with an innovation, period-proof underwear. I still need to really try it out. They were founded in 2014, and in 2015, I believe, they wanted to, this is like a grapefruit, as you can see, and they wanted to do this type of campaign in, I think, the Metro in New York, and so they had this particular image, plus an image of an egg kind of dripping off a table, and it was said to be too obscene to be run. This gave them like tons of publicity, so it was a really awesome move, and then they eventually were able to actually have the ad run. But it does show how entrenched this kind of taboo is. I mean, a picture of an egg and a grapefruit where we see pictures of women like almost completely naked all over the place. Crazy. Another maybe less known, well, more well-known brand, but less known campaign, Whisper, which I would already say has a lot to do with the taboo itself. But Whisper is Always brand in India. It's called Whisper instead of Always. And they ran in 2015, I believe, they ran this campaign saying, you've taken the first step and touched the pickle. So touching pickle in India, you're not allowed to touch pickle or flowers, by the way, because they'll wilt and die because we have menotoxin. And they started this campaign aiming to have people talk about it and to educate people that you can touch pickle when you're menstruating. I thought it was interesting. Perhaps some of you came across Rupi Kaur, who is an artist and an activist as well as a poet, and she has done many things, but this was one of the things that I think went viral, so to speak. So she had a picture of herself menstruating, and it was taken off, I think, Instagram about 3 times and sparked a large discussion on why this would be seen as too obscene to be on Instagram, whereas again, we have like half-naked ladies all over the place, but this would then not be appropriate. I think one of, maybe you guys are familiar, at least the person who's been here for 20 times to the Creative Morning session was maybe there when Mandy Smith was here. Mandy Smith is I think she's from London, but she lives here in Amsterdam, and is an artist as well as a paper sculptor. So she uses paper, and she has set up this project, No More Cutting, where she's trying to gain, I think, work towards breaking the taboo around female genital mutilation. And that seen as like the female genital mutilation that I think it's 3 million girls or so per year have to undergo in certain countries, but as well as the more modern form of female genital mutilation, which I think there's been an increase of 20% or something crazy, don't pin me on the numbers, but here in the Netherlands, in women or girls, young girls, going to have surgery to change the looks of their vagina because they think, and vulva, because they don't think it looks normal, which I think is really sad and actually really important to start talking about what is normal. The vagina dispatches was something a little bit more recent, so this was in 2016. The Guardian worked together with 2 journalist artists to make the vagina dispatches, where they want to, again, have a conversation. What do they say about it? They want to improve your genital knowledge. So in one of the videos, they're really funny to watch, one of the girls walks around as like a big vulva vagina and then asks people to name the parts. And it's really sad because almost nobody can name the different parts. And I think that, if you look back in history, is also something that we've unfortunately have maintained. I think for a very long time, there weren't different names for the female genitalia. It was just kind of lumped all together or seen as a reflection, a mirror of the male genitalia. So your ovaries were your female testicles and the vagina was the penis. So that's also quite crazy. This is an app that I think is really interesting, Clue. It was also started in 2012 with the goal to take female reproductive health out of the taboo land and start a reproductive health revolution. And so it's a period app, tracking app, but it's really scientific based. It's really interesting. They give you a lot of information. I use it myself. And if you've never used it, it would be worth taking a look at. And instead of being like pink and flowery like some of them, this one is quite different, I think quite modern, has a different take and really scientific, scientifically based. So an interesting change. And then something totally different, Girls, the TV show, which was also founded in 2012, and they said it was set up, or Lena Dunham said it was set up because it reflects part of the population that wasn't reflected in the Sex in the City series, and so that this was a different, and it's received a lot of, I think, negative feedback as well as positive feedback, and I think that's interesting. Whenever something is controversial, I think it's worth taking a look at and seeing why is it controversial and where do all these emotions stem from. And so I think it's a really interesting time that we live in for this particular taboo of menstruation. In 2015, Newsweek even did a cover article on menstruation saying it was the year of menstruation, that there was never had been talked about as much as it had that year, and I hope that we contributed a little bit to that, so that it gets more understood and isn't feared as something threatening or dangerous or shameful. So I wanted to take a moment to reflect, how can we use all this deep dive into the taboo of menstruation, how can we use that to look at other taboos that are definitely present in maybe already public discussions or not yet. And this is where it becomes a little bit difficult because every taboo is really quite different, I found when I was doing my research. But I'm going to try to say something that I feel strongly about. I believe a lot of taboos are based on the unknown, the fear of the unknown. And so it's really important to educate ourselves. And so like menstruation was a taboo because it wasn't understood, it was feared, something that was going to be dangerous. Interracial or religious marriages was a taboo that originated due to the absence of contact between different types of people and is now being upheld, I think, because of the fear that you're going to lose your culture or an identity. Maybe racism, a very difficult and I think a very one that I see, at least in public discussions here today with like the Zwarte Pizza Discussie or Sunny Bergman's recent documentary, Wit is ook een kleur. So that's something I think really here in the Netherlands that has been discussed. And I think it stems from the discrimination against a group of people based on the idea that some inherent characteristics, like skin color, for example, makes them inferior. And you already see it in the Greeks. They saw just non-Greeks, so everyone that wasn't them was barbarian and therefore could be a slave. And this has, I think, been passed down and passed down and passed down into something that I don't think we need any longer, but is really difficult to break through, and I think we need to talk about it. So all of us, being maybe creatives or in whatever form, have the opportunity to bring things to discussion and to not shy away from discussing the more difficult topics. So there's been research done that shows that when people are exposed to taboo topics, so they learn more about them, when they understand the challenges, better understand the challenges that people are faced with that are negatively affected by the upheld taboos, and when they have the experience of actually getting to know people or people that are negatively affected, that this helps in breaking the taboo. So let's all do our best, and next time that we're faced with something that we find difficult or triggers some sort of emotional response, to take a little better look and maybe look back into history to see how that can help us come to a better understanding. I'm getting to the end of my presentation, and I thought it would be nice to end with some art. So from Ruby Kapoor, the one that had that Instagram picture, she's an activist, an artist, and a poet, and she's written something nice that one of my friends shared with me this week, which was funny because, well, not so funny. A lot of people share a lot of stuff that's about menstruation with me all the time. I get really, like, the most graphic emails and a lot of interesting stuff my way. But this I thought was something quite beautiful, and I thought it was a nice way to end today's talk. So she says, "Apparently it is ungraceful of me to mention my period in public, because the actual biology of my body is too real. It's okay to sell what's between a woman's legs more than it's okay to mention the inner workings. The recreational use of this body is seen as beautiful, while its nature is seen as ugly."